This is the Rebel Call channel. Welcome to today's show. I've been covering the digital ID for a couple of years now, and it's very important to watch what's happening in Australia because Australia, much like China, is another country that is a blueprint. There's a blueprint taking place for eventually what the entire world will look like. Now you might say, why is it a blueprint there? Why is it happening there and not in America yet? Well, because Australia is one of the countries where the civilians gave up the right to bear arms. So everybody who's a civilian in these countries that gave up the right to bear arms is thus enslaved by a rogue government who is stripping the rights from the civilians. Now, one of the stories I've covered over the years with the digital ID, and you have to hear it out of their own mouths, because even Sky News Australia, which is supposed to be conservative news, much like Fox News, they're going to dupe both. There are certain agendas on the left and the right that both sides are going to be duped into. The digital ID is one of them. They are going to market it to conservatives because, again, some things don't play into the left-right divide. Some things are universal that they have to have happen. And the digital ID is one of them. But they have to market it different to each side. So one of the ways the conservatives are going to market this to get their Republicans on board is to tell you that illegal aliens, illegal immigrants won't be able to flood into conservative states, right? Well, the other way we're going to see this is what they're doing in Australia right now, which is the same thing you see happening in America and in every country, is story after story after story about data breach. Every single day, you're probably hearing a story about a data breach, and you're saying to yourself, why do I keep hearing about data breaches? Well, they're preparing you to eventually be hacked, or at least have a mass false flag hacking occur where people's bank accounts will go down to zero. Remember the Great Reset. Everything's going to be reset. But ultimately, they are using the fear of a data breach to convince civilians to want a digital ID where, of course, they tell you that you can no longer be hacked, that your ID and all this other stuff will all be digital. Everything that you have will be digital. There'll be no more paper trail. There'll be no more birth certificate. There'll be no more magic potion status that you have to walk around and carry. Everything will be digital. Listen to the propaganda in Australia as they are very, very close to implementing this digital ID in the upcoming weeks, which I've kept warning people about. Listen to how they're telling people out there that the digital ID will prevent data breaches and that everybody should support it, no matter what, left or right. Part of the trap.
Thanks for joining us again, Trevor. I want to talk about what we can do to prevent this as consumers, but first up, how have these data breaches occurred? Do we suspect some sort of cyber warfare or just stuff-ups?
This one's interesting, especially this Club New South Wales thing, because essentially this feels to me like a business disagreement. It's not a hack in any way, because what you have here is an Australian company who are providing these hardware services, the things that we put our driver's license into to sign into a club, and then software developers who they'd engaged to work with them. And it appears there's some disagreement between those two businesses, and I understand that there's actually a police investigation into that disagreement. And this other company, these developers, have gone, well, we've got all this data, and what they're saying is we shouldn't have this data. It's actually abhorrent that they've got this data, and they're simply letting Australians know. They're not claiming money, they're not claiming a ransom, they're not claiming they're going to release the data, but we have to assume that has to be in their minds. They're saying, I've actually contacted these developers, the people who have leaked this data, and they've said to me that they've not made any claim of ransom, but they've said the new developers involved would also have access to this data. Yeah. So we as individuals, and I'm affected, my local RSL, need to be saying, why is this data available to developers overseas when I'm simply signing in to get a beer or a snitty?
Yeah, and what about Qantas?
So the Qantas one is fascinating. It's really just probably a line of code error that someone is absolutely kicking themselves about when they release an update to their app or their IT systems. It allowed you to be authenticated. Yes, I'm that person, but then it showed you the wrong person's information. It is a fundamental failing, and I laugh a bit because it's just unbelievable that it could happen. I saw people's boarding passes. I could have boarded planes as the wrong person thanks to that absolutely silly failure of an IT system. It's such a big company, Chris.
Just quickly, we should then be careful about what information we give away, wherever and whenever?
Absolutely, we should be careful about where we hand our information over. And Chris, when the government talks about a digital ID, That prevents this. So we should support a digital ID. We should embrace it and use that, because that means we don't hand our information over to anyone.
Yeah, we'll check that out. I know that's coming up. A lot of consternation over that. Thanks for sorting it out for us, Trevor. I appreciate it. Trevor Long there, who's with EFTM. He's the editor there.
Okay, so the thing to keep in mind is how they're trying to market this to conservatives, telling you that it'll prevent a data breach. There will be major data breaches. We will all be affected by it. Anybody who has anything on the internet will be affected by it, but ultimately, anybody who has a bank account, anybody who is a citizen of any country will be affected by it, because they continue to put these stories out there about data breaches, about how, oh my goodness, did you know that people apparently wanted to hack your health insurance data, right? That was the latest in America. A big, large health insurance provider was hacked in America. Nobody goes, why would somebody even care? Why is somebody hacking this? They continually put the stories out there so that you believe that it's more and more likely that it's going to happen. And ultimately, when it does, they've already programmed you to believe that it's a lot of these boogeymen. It's a man in Russia. It's a man in a factory in China. All these people that you can never reach, you can never see, you don't know who they are, and they clearly have no motive. But the reality is, your own government wants you to have a digital ID. They want everybody to have a digital ID. There will be no more escaping anything. There will be no more avoiding taxes. There will be no more avoiding the carbon footprint. There will be no more pretending that you did or didn't take a magic potion. All of it will be digital. It'll all be accessible by them. But what they don't tell you about the digital ID is that eventually the digital ID, which right now, it's a lot like some of these states like Arizona, they've rolled out digital driver's licenses, right? Pennsylvania, I believe, is another one. They're rolling these out quietly in a lot of states. They're just conditioning you by rolling it out. They do the same thing with how a lot of people now who travel, who fly to different states, their plane ticket is just a barcode that they scan on their phone. Ultimately, all of this stuff is going to be embedded inside of you. So it's going to start off where it's very much like this, but ultimately it'll be in you. It'll be biometrical. But what they don't tell you, again, what they don't tell you is what they're really trying to ultimately hack, and what will ultimately be hacked is you. You're what's going to be hacked. So they're having you fearful that a boogeyman is going to hack into your accounts, et cetera, until you have a digital identity that's embedded in your genetic code, and you'll no longer be a human being. You'll be a hackable human.
The really big thing is hacking human beings. To hack human beings, you need a lot of biological knowledge, a lot of computing power, and especially a lot of data. If you have enough data about me, and enough computing power and biological knowledge, you can hack my body, my brain, my life. You can reach a point when you know me better than I know myself. And once you reach that point, and we are very close to that point, then democracy, the free market as we have, and actually all political systems, also authoritarian regimes, we have no idea what happens once you pass that point. Now, in the past, many tyrants and governments wanted to do it, but nobody understood biology well enough. And nobody had enough computing power and data to hack millions of people. Neither the Gestapo nor the KGB could do it. But soon, at least some corporations and governments will be able to systematically hack all the people. We humans should get used to the idea that we are no longer mysterious souls. We are now hackable animals.
So these are the stories we have to keep an eye on, right? Because Australians are now getting their national digital ID. It is a national digital identity law that is coming within a few weeks. And of course, they need all the propaganda out there they can to get people on board with it. And the type of propaganda that gets people on board is identity theft, data breaches. Nobody out there even knows why they're fearful of it. But they apparently think that some guy just wants to get their address, and then suddenly that means that their bank account's going to be at zero because these banks don't have the capability to prevent cyber attacks and cyber threats. This is all strategically being done. It's a massive psychological operation on the masses to convince them and work them into a digital ID. So verifying your identity is something that we all have to do fairly regularly, but it's about to be fundamentally changed in Australia as they've passed legislation for a national digital ID coming to America soon. And again, like I said earlier, it's very important to watch these countries that are basically, if they're not full-blown communist countries like China, then it's countries that claim to be a democracy like Australia. And again, this is coming to America. It's coming to all countries. Wherever you're listening to this from, it's coming to you. This is a globalist blueprint. It's just going to come at different times, and it's going to come manufactured as far as the branding of it is going to look differently, which is why they know in America they need to market this to conservatives in different ways, which is why they're baiting them with the border psyop. They're going to trick them into a digital ID so that there can't be any, illegal aliens or anybody from, the caves in Afghanistan. And they'll buy into this without realizing it. And they'll just say, look, you have PayPal, you already bank online, what's the big deal? And all of them will fall for it, okay? Because this is one of those things that's absolutely mandated in a global government. The same with the smart cities. Trump's freedom cities, just marketed different. It's all the same thing. It's a new infrastructure, and they're going to give people the illusion that it's still a republic, or as they call it, a democracy, et cetera, right? So the laws were passed in the Senate in March, which I covered, and will go before the lower house in the coming weeks, although the ID itself, which is called MyGov ID, is already up and running. So how do digital IDs work? They go on to explain how digital IDs work, not to be confused with a digital license, because they are completely different. They are a computerized version of a physical card. A digital ID is a system that allows Australians to quickly and easily identify themselves without having to provide points of ID to a range of organizations, okay? Remember that, because the dumbed-down sheeple thinks nothing further than it's just a license that you show. It is not. It's a digital ID system. And again, eventually this is like blockchain. I've talked about it. Not a lot of people seem to understand it, and I get it. But let me put it to you this way. Let me put it in layman's terms, okay? It's embedded inside of you, right? So when you go into a store and you have all those security cameras on you, or when the outbreak occurred and you went into a store and they had facial recognition on you and it checked your temperature, those types of things, you'll literally be able to go in and out of places where you think that you're free and you're walking around freely and everything is great and wonderful. You don't have to get your license out to show how old you are. You don't have to. It's all going to be biometric, okay? And it's going to be embedded in your genetic code. And I believe that this is the mark of the beast. I don't believe that this specific thing, the digital license, and the initial rollout of the digital ID system is. But when it becomes biometric, you will not be able to buy or sell without being in the system, without being in the database. And they have to create false flags and psyops all around this stuff to get people on board. So the article says, quote, I often talk about avoiding the painful process of collecting 100 points of data. It reminds me of 1,000 points of light from George Bush. But anyway, the process of collecting 100 points of ID, having to scan them, get them printed, and get some undecided back of them and act like exactly all of that physical paperwork and face-to-face interactions were useful. Now you can get them verified once, and then you're good to go to use them online or for multiple interactions. In essence, the digital ID acts as a go-between between the user and the organization that wants to verify their identity, which will be everything. You're not going to be able... Remember all the stuff I've been talking about with the scamming and the hacking. I know it's a lot going on. I know it's a lot to take in. I know it's depressing. But you got to pay attention to the stuff that they keep talking about. You keep hearing stories about data breaches, yes or no? Yes, we hear about it every single day, right? The other thing we keep hearing stories about are scams online. People getting scammed, romance scams, money scams. Okay, the digital ID, the digital verification is going to force you into having a digital ID in the Internet of Bodies, on the Internet, online. You're not going to be able to do this anymore. You're not going to be able to, quote unquote, ban evade on certain platforms. You're not going to be able to have SOC accounts on certain platforms. You are going to have to be verified, just like you've seen them conditioning people with on Twitter, right? Your Twitter verification. These are all things they've been conditioning you with so that when they announce this, you're already conditioned to think that it's normal. Oh, it's just like the Twitter verification, right? Right? And you won't be able to use the internet without it. You won't be able to buy or sell or do any of the stuff that you currently do in this system. You'll have to go outside the system, okay? That's why people call it the beast system. Article goes on to say, quote, I use the analogy of it's like going to the pub and someone being your wingman. It's like setting that up through an app on your phone. So when you go to an organization, you type in their number that they give you, which is registered with the government scheme, into an app that you have on your phone. And then it contacts your organization through the pathway that they have approved with the government and says, yes, we've got Erica's app view. I can verify that this is Erica. And this is the person in the article is named Erica. So John Doe, say whatever you want. Yes, we've got that it's you. We can confirm that it's you specifically is what they're saying. At the moment, the app that does that is the government's MyGov ID, but private providers could get involved after the legislation passes. The thing I like about the scheme is that, and scheme's a very good word to use, is they are talking about also having third parties involved. If you look at someone like MasterCard or Visa, they have a vested interest in making sure that they don't have fraud in the network. Okay? And then they go on to say, why create a digital ID? What are the benefits? In short, security. The benefits, security. This is how they're using propaganda as a tool to brainwash people. Your security, which is why they keep telling you that you should be scared of cyber hack, data hack, your identity stolen. Okay, it's all to work you into a digital ID. So they say the current system is plagued by identity theft, fraud, and a lack of control over personal data. By sharing personal documents and other information with a single provider, the digital ID would, if implemented properly, negate the risk of identity theft from the likes of the data breaches and hacks that hit Optus, Medibank, and Latitude in recent years. Australia is designing the system with a lot of security benefits, okay? And what they never tell you about the hack that nobody asks is who is doing it, right? They'll just show you the image, like I've always said. They show you the image of a guy in a mask with a hoodie on. They want you to think it's a big bad boogeyman. All the hacks are coming from within our own governments. They're not real necessary hacks that are going on. Right now, they're conditioning you into wanting the digital ID, so they're using fear. But there's going to be a massive data breach that does affect people. People's bank accounts likely are going to go to zero. There's going to be a great reset. This could occur with the grid shutdown or something along those lines. But we know that something's coming. They have to create something, just like they did with the outbreak, to get people on board. They have to create something along the lines of this to get you on board with the digital ID. So it has to be something major that they create. But remember, when it happens, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's your own government in whatever country you reside in, right? Which is pretty much one and the same, because all the governments are working together now against the civilians. They will create a massive hacking to work people into the digital ID, but we'll watch how it works in Australia. Okay, and we'll watch how it works, because this is another place that's a blueprint. China's a blueprint. Australia's a blueprint. These are countries where the civilians have given up their freedoms. They've given up their rights to things like hate speech. They've all fallen for all of the propaganda the government's put out. Okay, and that's why we have to be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. We cannot fall for these deceptions. We need to make sure that people we know don't fall for these events that the government creates because they want to get your weapons out of your home, because they want you to be able to literally do nothing when they decide to implement this fascist, tyrannical garbage that they have planned for all of us. America's going to be one of the last ones to fall because the citizens in this country are armed. But they're going to do something, I believe, along the lines of dividing us into two, which will make it easier for them to destroy sitting ducks and go to war with red states versus a country or a government like Russia or China, etc. So the digital ID is rolling out in Australia in the coming weeks. It's not a matter of if it's going to pass. It's already passed. It's already set. And again, we have to keep an eye on these things, because these are things that they're tricking people into wanting. Problem, reaction, solution. The data breach propaganda they're creating. Any types of hacks that are actually happening. If you're someone out there, you're like, wait, I was hacked. This happened to me. Well, guess who probably was behind it, okay? Your own NSA, your own CIA, your own FBI. They are getting you ready to get the digital ID, and they're going to have to create false flags and psyops around it to make you compliant to what they ultimately want. Total control. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you as always, and your families.